The story begins with the scene of a middle-aged man withdrawing money from an ATM. But if he managed to withdraw a ridiculously huge wad of cash, that would be too normal because he's actually a tycoon. Yet life is unfair, and even a strand of hair never grows straight. This uncle was withdrawing money, but his face looked extremely terrified. His withdrawal actions were normal, but the ATM suddenly spoke, asking if he wanted to begin a deal. Right after nodding in agreement, in the underground parking lot, a bizarre luxury car immediately appeared, burst through a wall, and took the man to a place called the Financial District. Standing in that place was a young man in a black cloak, muttering strange phrases like "chickens fly, dogs bark" about money. This man was Mikuni, the owner of that area. As he sat sipping a glass of red wine, a pink-haired young man approached. His name was Masakaki, announcing that today the owner would have a deal match with the middle-aged man. Both sides had agreed to the match. Immediately afterward, Mikuni and the uncle each summoned mysterious creatures using cards. The middle-aged man screamed and charged in to shower love on him, but Mikuni remained calm. The man used every trick to win money, but it didn't last long before the battle ended quickly. Mikuni completely outclassed the middle-aged man and won by a landslide. Because he lost the deal, the next morning, the uncle ran onto the subway tracks and took his own life. In another development, our main character, Kimimaro, a poor university student juggling two part-time jobs at a convenience store, was busy when Hanabi, a classmate, showed up and handed him study notes for the test tomorrow. He was overjoyed and grateful until he found out his crush came with her boyfriend. Truly, it's the fate of a male lead who hasn't awakened his powers yet. Few butterflies hover around a withered flower. That night, as he was buried in homework preparing for the test, a strange light appeared in Kimimaro's house. When he opened the door, Masakaki, the pink-haired guy, appeared, claiming to be an HR manager from the Midas Bank. Upon hearing this, Kimimaro immediately refused him, thinking he was just some scammy MLM guy. After all, a broke college student doesn't have money to invest in stocks or banks. But as soon as he shut the door, Masakaki suddenly appeared inside the house behind him. At that moment, the atmosphere of the room shifted into an unnatural space filled with thick white mist. The pink-haired man explained that in this space, time was completely frozen, so Kimimaro could both study and listen to him preach. In the Eastern Financial District, there was an ongoing recruitment for the position of entrepreneur, and the randomly selected person was none other than Kimimaro. Yoga Kimimaro, 19 years old, a second-year student at Heisei University of Economics. Masakaki accurately read out all his information. The entrepreneur position sounded simple. It was just sitting around doing nothing. Masakaki also revealed that if Kimimaro accepted the deal, he would immediately become wealthy. However, when Kimimaro realized that the condition was to stake his own future, he didn't hesitate and flat-out refused. Handsome, smart, talented. Those were all things his brother didn't have, but at least our main character doesn't lust for riches. Being rich for 3 generations is okay, but Kimimaro? Nope. Masakaki still didn't give up trying to lure Kimimaro. He said the boy could live comfortably without becoming a civil servant. But at that moment, Kimimaro woke up and thought it was just a weird dream. The next morning, Kimimaro went to an ATM to withdraw money and discovered his bank account suddenly had 500,000 yen in it. Becoming rich overnight was real, folks. Because the amount was so large and fell from the sky, Kimimaro was overwhelmed. Even at school, he couldn't focus enough to talk to his crush. After being advised by the older guys he worked with at the convenience store that it was probably just someone transferring money to the wrong account, and that if the heavens gave you blessings, you should just spend them, Kimimaro decided to go back to the ATM once more to withdraw money and invite Hanabi out for bubble tea. As soon as he withdrew the cash, Masakaki immediately appeared behind him. The pink-haired man once again used his mind-opening technique, saying that if Kimimaro followed him, he could win over his crush and maybe even meet his father. Being a guy, Kimimaro was determined to stand his ground. But then Masakaki pulled out a card, and Kimimaro was instantly mesmerized by it. When he came back to his senses, he found himself sitting in a luxurious but bizarre taxi. The vehicle zoomed through space and quickly took him to a place called Midas Bank Square within the financial district, a vast area where the so-called entrepreneurs just lazed around doing nothing. Through the giant lenses set up in the middle of the square, Kimimaro noticed that every person there was followed by a strange and different creature. Masakaki explained to him that those were called assets. They were personal properties representing each person's future and also served as their combat partners in weekly deal battles. Above the square was a board displaying all the data and stock values of deal opponents. Every entrepreneur there had to participate in a deal at least once a week. It was both their right and obligation. Meanwhile, Mikuni was inside betting with other entrepreneurs and a journalist on whether this new rookie, who looked as plain as a default character in a free-to-play game like Kimimaro, would amount to anything. Still dazed like someone suffering from late-stage nitrogen poisoning, Kimimaro was pushed by Masakaki into the deal space. Following instructions, he placed his hand on his card and an asset appeared, a cute little lowly girl named MCU, who was also a rookie like him. Kimimaro was visibly disappointed that his asset wasn't as fierce and intimidating as his opponent's. But the win doesn't stop just because the tree stays still. MCU exploded in rage at being looked down on by a newbie and punched Kimimaro hard enough to give him psychological trauma. Then the countdown began, and the chubby guy along with his asset immediately charged in, violently showering Kimimaro with affection, forcing MCU to take heavy injuries just to protect the clueless weight known as Kimimaro, who still had no idea what the hell was going on. After temporarily escaping the enemy, MCU told him not to worry about her and to focus on not getting hit by the fat guy, since each hit would deduct money from his account and could lead to bankruptcy. Life has ups and downs, but he'd never been rich before, so Kimimaro wasn't worried about going broke. He was more concerned about MCU's injuries. That, folks, is what we call dying of pride before heart disease. This made the asset girl snap and slap him several more times. At the same time, Mikuni and the journalist along with other entrepreneurs were watching the deal unfold. After the fat guy discovered their hiding spot, MCU took a barrage of critical hits just to keep Kimimaro safe. Our main character still stood there screaming uselessly like a loser. After evading the enemy a second time, MCU's injuries were mysteriously healing quickly, and Kimimaro, now calmer, asked her to teach him how to fight. Unfortunately, just then, the fat guy found them again. Once more, MCU sacrificed herself to shield Kimimaro and ended up pinned under a giant metal ball. At this point, he had no choice but to face the fat guy head-on. Kimimaro quickly followed MCU's instructions, slid his hand over the card, which was also the ritual to invest 10 million yen into her account, and released a powerful attack that completely incinerated the massive metal ball and dealt massive damage, utterly defeating the opponent. This outcome left Mikuni and a reporter named Takadazaki completely stunned. After all, no rookie had ever won their first deal match before, especially not someone as clueless about the rules as Kimimaro. Back to Kimimaro, after topping up the game and easily outclassing his opponent, his account balance tripled. Learning that MCU was still safe, he relaxed and passed out. The next morning, when he woke up, he found himself back in his familiar room. Thinking the battle from last night was just a dream, Masakaki suddenly popped up right behind him again. He told Kimimaro to enjoy the thrill of victory for now and that he'd come pick him up next week. Masakaki also warned him that if he ever went bankrupt in the financial district, his real-world fate would be unimaginably harsh, so our protagonist could no longer refuse any deal matches. Afterward, the pink-haired man showed Kimimaro how to communicate with his asset through the card. Kimimaro asked MCU how she was doing, which left her bewildered that he was worried about an asset. That afternoon, Kimimaro went to the ATM to check his account balance, only to be floored by the number 33.5 million yen. This huge sum made him so anxious that he couldn't focus in class. Hanabi noticed his distracted behavior and how he kept staring at his card. Meanwhile, back in the Mita's bank headquarters, Mikuni told his assistant to dig into Kimimaro's background. Ever since returning from the financial district, Kimimaro suddenly started seeing the black-colored Midas bills, which still appeared as regular Japanese yen to everyone else. When he asked MCU what would happen if he used the black bills, she admitted she didn't know. Kimimaro tried his best not to use them, but this got him into serious trouble with a thuggish customer. Unexpectedly, Mikuni, posing as an ordinary civilian, showed up and cleverly helped him drive the thug away. Outside, to thank Mikuni for his help, Kimimaro bought him a can of coffee from the convenience store, which nearly brought Mikuni to tears. When Mikuni mentioned the black bills, Kimimaro realized he too was from the financial district. Mikuni confirmed he had watched Kimimaro's deal match against the fat guy the night before. He explained that Midas money came from the Midas Bank, and anyone returning from the financial district could see it. He also assured Kimimaro that nothing would happen if he used the Midas bills. Kimimaro replied that the pink-haired clown had told him his future was being used as collateral. Mikuni argued that using the future to generate money was perfectly normal. Through this conversation, Mikuni indirectly revealed that he had known Kimimaro's missing father. He then introduced himself as Mikuni Saukairo and said he would help Kimimaro if possible before leaving. At the same time, a mysterious blonde girl was watching their secret meeting through a surveillance camera. That girl was named Sato, and her true identity was that of an undercover investigator working for an organization probing the true purpose of the financial district's existence. In short, she was a cop tailing an illegal financial organization. She had visited the financial district 51 times, with 11 of those involving direct participation in deal matches. Though still a rookie entrepreneur, Sato was sharp and formidable, being the only investigator to ever infiltrate the dangerous financial organization. Sato had a deal scheduled every Wednesday, and with the help of her asset, a massive white wolf, she always fought with the utmost determination not to lose, because bankruptcy would mean being permanently expelled from the financial district. Sato and her organization had both determined that Mikuni was the primary target they needed to keep under close surveillance. This was because not only did he wield tremendous influence over the government and global financial corporations in the real world, but he had also established a powerful alliance within the financial district itself. What made him even more dangerous was his growing intention to invest Maida's money directly into the real human world. For Sato, Mikuni was an extremely mysterious and dangerous specter. The morning after his unexpected conversation with Mikuni, Kimimaro went to visit his aunt Kyoyuko, his first time seeing her since graduating high school. The purpose of this visit was to ask about his father. Aunt Kyoyuko revealed that after his parents passed away, they had left behind several items related to stocks or securities. When Kimimaro looked through his missing father's belongings, he was shocked to find a notebook with the Midas Bank emblem inside. As he flipped to the last page, he was completely stunned into silence. Kimimaro immediately asked MCU how he could find the pink-haired clown Masakaki, and she guessed that he might currently be at the Midas Bank. She also noticed that Kimimaro's face was showing an oddly terrifying expression. Upon returning to the financial district, Kimimaro found Masakaki and immediately rushed at him to demand answers about the notebook his father had left behind. No matter how hard he pressed, Masakaki refused to disclose any information regarding his father. Kimimaro suspected that the notebook was the reason he was chosen as an entrepreneur in the financial district, but Masakaki insisted that it was merely a coincidence. At that moment, Mikuni suddenly appeared behind Kimimaro, saying he had business with him. Mikuni then unexpectedly brought him to see the info hunter Takadazaki, allowing Kimimaro to ask directly about his father. Surprisingly, Takadazaki knew of Yoga, Kimimaro's father. When asked what his relationship to Yoga was, Kimimaro answered honestly, he was his son. After exchanging a few flirtatious glances with Mikuni in the background, Takadazaki received a 100,000 Midas payment from Mikuni as a service fee. Only then did he reveal what he knew about Yoga. As they say, money isn't everything, but without it, you're blind to the truth. Takadazaki explained that Yoga, Kimimaro's missing father, was once a powerful player in the financial district. He was addicted to deal matches and exceptionally skilled at them, but even he couldn't avoid a devastating loss, which ultimately led to his immediate bankruptcy. And in the financial district, going bankrupt means your future is gone, rendering you unable to communicate with your family, friends, or anyone else. Eventually, Kimimaro's father took his own life. His body was so badly damaged that it couldn't be identified, so the authorities shelved the suicide case. When Kimimaro asked about his father's personality and who he really was, Takadazaki continued, saying that Yoga had a severe obsession with money. Even for just a few coins, he would go to great lengths to make as much money as possible. Because of this, people in the financial district had given him the nickname the Miser. Takadazaki then shared another important detail. Since Kimimaro was Yoga's son, he might inherit his father's uncanny luck in deal matches. However, he warned Kimimaro to be careful and not let the same fate of suicide repeat itself. After the conversation with Takadazaki, Kimimaro's mood turned extremely heavy. He was disappointed and resentful toward his father for choosing an abnormal life driven by money and for abandoning both him and his mother. But Mikuni disagreed. He believed Kimimaro's father had only wanted to earn enough money to give Kimimaro and his mother a more comfortable, well-provided life. Mikuni also advised Kimimaro to clearly determine his own goal for making money, because even if he wanted to start over, he wouldn't be able to do anything without money. Therefore, Kimimaro needed to keep participating in deal matches, earn as much money as possible, and spend it on something meaningful. Saving money might bring him personal joy, but it would never change the world around him. After being lectured by Mikuni with a full-blown enlightenment no jutsu, Kimimaro became completely hollow and burst into tears on the spot. Elsewhere, in a hidden corner, Sato was still carrying out her mission of monitoring all of Mikuni's daily activities and reporting them to her organization. However, she began to clash with her superior. Sato genuinely wanted to stop the attempt to circulate Midas money in the real world, while her boss believed that interfering could bring about extremely serious consequences. A few days later, the mysterious black taxi once again came to pick up Kimimaro and swiftly transported him back to the financial district for this week's compulsory deal match. To his shock, his second opponent turned out to be none other than his university professor Ibarra. It turned out Ibarra had joined the financial district nearly a year ago, with the goal of earning extra income for his family. According to what Kimimaro knew, Professor Ibarra and his wife were about to welcome their third child. But apparently, their accidental family expansion wasn't causing them any financial stress, probably because, with a street-facing house and a businessman father-in-law, money wasn't something they had to worry about. The wife kept giving birth, and Ibarra handled everything else. In truth, Ibarra had been making extra income through winning deal matches in the financial district. Back in the current battle, Kimimaro didn't know what to do when having to directly face his own teacher. But Ibarra didn't hesitate for a second and made the first move. Though he always carried himself with grace and elegance in the lecture hall, when it came to wealth versus poverty, he revealed his rather sleazy side. Indeed, with money involved, the teacher-student bond instantly vanished. Ibarra immediately commanded his asset to attack his own student with a poison-based move, leaving Kimimaro in agony and suffering massive financial losses. Then he decided to launch a final attack to quickly end the pointless match. However, in that moment of danger, MCU rushed to Kimimaro and urged him to sell one of the 10 stocks tied to her. From outside the arena, Mikuni instantly purchased it for 50 million yen. This gave Kimimaro just enough funds to invest in MCU and unleash a mid-level attack that completely defeated Ibarra. From the start, Ibarra had assumed he could easily crush the clueless rookie student, but in the end, he ended up eating his words. Unable to accept the reality of losing a deal, Ibarra was left in shock. Then, Masasaki the clown suddenly appeared out of nowhere and promptly expelled Ibarra from the financial district. After the match, Kimimaro was very curious about the stock selling mechanic. MCU explained that each asset had 10 shares, and their owner could sell up to 9 of them, but would need to buy them back later. Kimimaro also didn't forget to thank Mikuni for helping him earlier, but Mikuni simply replied that he only bought the asset's stock for his company's benefit, so they could turn a profit from the transaction. Upon returning home after the battle, Kimimaro asked the old taxi driver from the financial district what horrible things might happen if someone lost a match and went bankrupt. The driver admitted he didn't really know, but he said that returning to the real world could actually be quite interesting. Kimimaro felt like an idiot for even trying to have a proper conversation with such a bizarre old man. Later, at Guild HQ, Mikuni's assistant reported some important information. The guild currently had over 1 in 200 members and was controlling about 1/3 of the financial district. If that number rose above 50%, Mikuni would essentially gain control over most of the financial district's operations and influence. It turned out that the ultimate goal of the mysterious man Mikuni was to change the current operating system of the financial district and ultimately bring it to an end. At the same time, he also wanted to persuade Kimimaro ideologically to join the guild alliance. Back in the real world, the next morning in class, Kimimaro was extremely worried and anxious about his professor's fate, but Ibarra arrived at school and taught as calmly as ever. After class, Kimimaro immediately chased after him to ask about his situation, and Ibarra invited him over to his house so they could talk in detail. That afternoon, Kimimaro visited the home of Mr. and Mrs. Ibarra, only to find out that things were far more complicated than he had imagined. After the night when Ibarra lost to Kimimaro and went bankrupt in the financial district, all 3 of his children immediately vanished. Even the third child, who was still in his wife's womb, no longer existed in this world. Everyone in the real world, except for Kimimaro and Ibarra, had completely forgotten about the existence of the 3 poor children, even Ibarra's wife. Despite this, Ibarra held no grudge against Kimimaro for defeating him in last night's steel match. Because if Kimimaro had lost, his life would also have been affected in deeply negative ways. If anyone was to blame, it was Ibarra himself for not fully understanding the severe consequences of using one's future as collateral in exchange for money. He also expressed regret that he hadn't joined the guild alliance earlier. He explained to his young student that the guild was an organization founded by Mikuni, with the goal of reducing the impact the financial district had on the real world. In other words, a defeated entrepreneur returning to the real world would face reduced losses. He would lose, but not go completely bankrupt. However, if someone joined the guild, even if they won a deal match, they would not receive any profits. It was precisely for this reason that Ibarra declined to join at the time, but now he deeply regretted it, although it was too late. Before parting, Ibarra gave Kimimaro one final piece of advice. Never lose any deal, no matter what, because Kimimaro was the only person left in the world who still carried the memory of his 3 beloved children. Hearing those words from his university professor made Kimimaro's heart even heavier. The next day, Mikuni had a rather important deal match against another high-ranking player named Kikuchi, and he asked Kimimaro to come along and observe the battle so he could learn from it. Everyone present was excited to watch Mikuni fight, as a match between 2 elite players was always thrilling. Right before the match began, Mikuni asked Kikuchi if he still had no intention of joining the guild alliance. The old man completely ignored the question, and so the deal officially commenced. Kikuchi immediately commanded his asset, named Hearst, to transform into countless mirrors that surrounded Mikuni and his asset, Kazu, then launched continuous deadly attacks on both of them. Mikuni's funds rapidly dropped. However, the spectators outside observed that the rate of financial loss was still stable, and Kikuchi wouldn't profit from this if things continued that way, because Hearst was an asset that required massive upkeep costs. Of course, Kikuchi knew this clearly. He immediately executed a stock sell command for Hearst, having already arranged for a group of businessmen to buy the stocks in advance, thus securing a dominant cash advantage over Mikuni and completely overwhelming him. But when there were only 20 seconds left in the match, Mikuni suddenly activated Kazu's White Knight ability, allowing his 2 other assets, Sleeping Beauty and Q, to appear on the battlefield. The 2 assets quickly worked together to destroy Hearst's core, giving Mikuni the opening to launch his final move and defeat Kikuchi. The flamboyant old man ultimately lost the deal match. However, he likely wouldn't suffer too much in the real world, because Mikuni had made sure not to let the match end with too wide a gap in outcome. Witnessing this, our main character, Kimimaro, seemed to have finally realized that in order to minimize the pain he might cause others, he needed to possess the same overwhelming power as Mikuni. Only then could he have full control over the outcome of a deal. Immediately afterward, Mikuni wholeheartedly began teaching Kimimaro how to manage the outcome of a deal match. First, to reduce the impact on the real world, one must win but without profiting too much. Second, one must develop judgment, the ability to assess both oneself and the opponent accurately in every aspect: asset, EQ, knowledge, financial capacity, etc. In other words, mastering all informational variables to form an accurate evaluation of the opponent. Among all factors, asset is the most critical in a deal, which is why Kimimaro decided to begin learning how to cooperate more effectively in battle with his own asset, MCO. In his next deal match, Kimimaro tried to practice managing the profit margin, even when he already had the upper hand. However, since MCU was completely unaware of this strategy, their coordination faltered, creating an opening for the opponent to turn the tide. As a result, MCU ended up with a bruised eye, and Kimimaro lost the match. At the same time, Mikuni and his assistant were carrying out a transaction called deal income cost collection from other entrepreneurs within the financial district. Right afterward, he went to meet a man referred to as the vice chairman to propose buying out the entire national debt. The truth was that Mikuni was trying to resolve Japan's national budget deficit in order to help the country's citizens. Handsome, kind, and rich, what more could you want, right? Someone get in line to be Mikuni's wife, please. Back to Kimimaro. Although it was just a minor defeat, he still feared that misfortune might befall his loved ones. He quickly called his aunt Kyoyuko to check in, and learned that she had been hospitalized for an appendectomy. Fortunately, her condition was not serious, and she would be discharged in about a week. Kyoyuko also reassured her nephew not to worry too much, as she was still in good health despite her age. The next morning, Kimimaro rushed to school to check on his crush. Hanabi said she was completely fine and had even bought a cute new dress to prepare for her upcoming internship. The only real penalty Kimimaro suffered from last night's deal loss was failing one course. That alone helped him breathe a small sigh of relief. At the same time, Sato was secretly passing on the intel she had gathered from the financial district to her superior aboard a subway train. Now, knowing that the consequences of his loss weren't too severe, Kimimaro headed home and made himself some instant noodles. While waiting for them to cook, he checked on MCU's condition. She said she had recovered but questioned why Kimimaro hadn't told her in advance about his plan to merely draw the match. Because of that, she got punched in the face by the enemy and was absolutely furious. "My pretty face is not for getting wrecked. Got it, main character?" she snapped. While Kimimaro was listening to MCU lecture him about combat coordination, the noodles finished cooking. At first, MCU was grossed out watching him eat. But when he explained that eating noodles brought a sense of joy and happiness, she said she wanted to try it too. Kimimaro originally planned to feed her a bite himself, but then thought it might be a bit too hatin', so he promised to let her try it another time, then proceeded to eat the entire cup of instant noodles himself. Meanwhile, after losing to Mikuni, Kikuchi, who had only been lightly affected, continued to participate in another deal match. This time, he faced off against another elite player named Shizawa. Kikuchi once again used the same old trick, commanding his asset, Hearst, to turn into mirrors and surround the opponent. But Shizawa casually responded, "That's old news, man," and his asset instantly nullified Kikuchi's recycled attack, then dealt a massive counter blow straight to him. In the end, Kikuchi suffered a crushing defeat, went bankrupt, and was quickly expelled from the financial district. In the real world, not only was Kikuchi arrested for corruption, but his pharmaceutical company, Bashu Corporation, also plummeted uncontrollably, losing the trust of its customers. Kimimaro later went to see Professor Ibarra, who explained that the sudden collapse of Bashu would destroy the futures of over 10,000 employees. The consequences of a deal match, in reality, could be devastatingly severe. In Ibarra's own life, even his wife had now vanished as if she had never existed. A few days later in the financial district, while MCU was eating noodles and evaluating Kimimaro's new plan to control a deal, the information broker Takadazaki suddenly appeared and offered Kimimaro a hot scoop on Bashu Corporation for a price of 1 million yen. Eager for any updates on Bashu, Kimimaro agreed to pay him. That's right, our main character is now rich beyond belief, casually dropping 1 million yen like it's spare change. After receiving the money, Takadazaki revealed that a pharmaceutical company named Fee Pharma, founded 5 years ago, would be acquiring Bashu and all of its debt. Though Fee Pharma was said to be a foreign corporation, the true owner behind it was none other than Uncle Mikuni himself. Thanks to this, the ripple effects of the previous deal on the real world would be minimized. Upon learning this, Kimimaro went to confront Mikuni and asked why he had done it. Mikuni explained that the Midas money had already infiltrated the real world, and it was now extremely difficult to stop its spread. That was why Mikuni had formed the guild to maintain balance between the two worlds by using Midas money itself to contain the fallout from deal matches. After this conversation, Kimimaro officially joined the guild, although some members claimed he wasn't worthy since he didn't fully understand the guild's objectives or how to stabilize a deal. Kimimaro didn't care. In fact, Mikuni even considered copying Kimimaro's odd behavior and feeding instant noodles to his own asset. At that same moment, back at the intelligence agency headquarters, Sato continued to argue with her superior over shutting down the operations of the financial district and the spread of Midas money. After returning, she began tracking information on another high-level player in the financial district, Sonoza Ku, age 29, who had an astonishing deal record of 56 wins and only 1 loss. His current personal wealth exceeded 9.8 billion yen, and his next deal was scheduled for Thursday against none other than Kimimaro. At that very moment in the financial district, Kimimaro was chatting casually with MCU when Sonoza suddenly appeared out of nowhere and complimented MCU, calling her a beautiful asset with a cute pair of horns. This caused Kimimaro to immediately suspect him of being some kind of hatin' creep who liked to flirt with other people's girls, so he looked at Sonoza with visible disgust and contempt. But then Sonoza introduced himself as Kimimaro's next opponent in the upcoming deal and asked for a moment of his time to talk. It turned out Sonoza wanted Kimimaro to voluntarily forfeit the match. He even offered to pay the penalty fee half of Kimimaro's total personal assets out of his own pocket. Sonoza explained that even if one managed to control and balance the outcome of a deal, the impact on the real world was still unavoidable. That's why he believed forfeiting was the most effective and responsible option. However, he didn't demand an immediate answer, and told Kimimaro to take all the time he needed to think it over. He also handed Kimimaro a digital business card so they could stay in contact at any time, and just as he finished speaking, Sonoza suddenly vanished. A while later, at a convenience store, Kimimaro flipped through a magazine to learn more about Sonoza and discovered that he was the representative of a non-profit unification organization whose goal was to provide vaccines to developing countries and support various other causes. With his fresh outlook and charismatic appearance, Sonoza was adored and respected by many, earning him the charming nickname, the Charity Prince. That night, while Kimimaro was on his way home, he was suddenly tricked into getting into a car by the female agent Sato, who used the excuse that his aunt Kyoyuko was in danger. As soon as he got in, she locked the doors and drove off, leaving him with no way to escape. At first, Kimimaro suspected she was a kidnapper targeting broke college students, but seriously, who kidnaps a penniless student? But she quickly explained that she was actually a fellow player in the financial district, and also an undercover agent investigating the district and the Midas money. After hearing her explain her background, Kimimaro finally relaxed and agreed to talk. During their conversation, Sato bluntly criticized Mikuni's method of using Midas money to stabilize the economy, calling it only a temporary solution, one that would lead to even greater consequences in the future. According to her, the only way to truly resolve the issue was to dismantle the financial district system entirely. She hoped Kimimaro would cooperate with her. While he was still hesitant since he had already joined Mikuni's guild, Sato suddenly pushed Kimimaro down right there in the car and told him that she could see it in his eyes. There was something more important to him than money. Just then, she noticed a car tailing them. Without wasting time, she used her card to summon the mysterious old man taxi driver, who helped them escape to safety. Before parting ways, Sato advised Kimimaro to accept Sonoza's invitation to talk, as he was a top-tier player who genuinely wanted to end the financial district's impact on the real world. Although Kimimaro was still struggling with countless chaotic thoughts, he decided to meet Sonoza the very next day. Just like Sato, Sonoza also criticized the actions of Mikuni's guild, claiming they were sacrificing the future just to stabilize the present. That's why he had refused to join them. Back in the financial district, knowing that Kimimaro would be swayed after meeting Sato and Sonoza, Mikuni personally came to talk to him. Mikuni immediately countered their idealistic views, saying that only the strong could afford to dream about the future, while those who were barely surviving had no choice but to focus on the present. Mikuni also revealed that he was the only person who had ever defeated Sonoza in a deal match. He believed Sonoza had never experienced poverty and thus couldn't understand the blood-stained reality of money. At the end of their conversation, Mikuni gave Kimimaro one final piece of advice. In the cruel world they lived in, the only way to survive was to fight and to win. The next day, despite still feeling conflicted, Kimimaro decided to go through with his deal match against Sonoza. During the battle, Sonoza's usual calm demeanor vanished, revealing a completely different person. His asset unleashed an overwhelming and terrifying power. Once again, MCU put herself on the line, taking the full brunt of a devastating attack to shield Kimimaro, ending up badly injured and covered in wounds. Seeing this left Kimimaro terrified and heartbroken. But at the same time, it made him realize something important. He didn't want to win, nor did he want to lose. What he truly wanted was to protect what belonged to him. In the end, Kimimaro and his asset, MCU, joined forces to unleash 2 consecutive mid-level attacks with devastating power, completely defeating Sonoza in the deal. This immediately resulted in Sonoza suffering significant losses in the real world. The next morning, when Kimimaro went to visit Sonoza at his office, he found him preparing to move out with a few friends and colleagues to continue nurturing hope through other charitable organizations around the world. Rather than showing any anger over his defeat, Sonoza expressed strong faith that Kimimaro could be the one to rise up and overthrow the financial district. Before leaving, he asked Kimimaro to deliver a cup of his favorite instant noodles to MCU as an apology for the severe injuries she suffered during their battle. At this point, the story flashes back to the past, to the time before Mikuni became a top-class player in the financial district. Back when he was still a university student, Mikuni was forced by his father to follow in the family's business path. His father relentlessly drilled twisted views into his son's mind about the power of money, saying that a single banknote was just a piece of paper. But when stacked into a pile, it became more than just money, it became power, a terrifying power that could shake the entire world. After graduating from university, Mikuni quickly became his father's personal secretary. This crushed his spirit to the point where he gave up his lifelong passion for music and disbanded the college band he had already signed a contract with. From then on, he could only work in despair, doing everything his father demanded. His father's main line of work was building interconnected financial networks, using money for both good and evil purposes. He would strengthen these connections with more money, and if one party collapsed, the rest would fall like dominoes. That, he said, was true power. However, his father didn't invent this system, he merely exploited it after it was already in place. Mikuni also had a younger sister named Takako, who had been gravely ill since childhood. She spent nearly her entire life confined to a hospital bed. Mikuni cared for her deeply. She was the one person he truly wanted to protect. Even his decision to follow his father's orders was ultimately driven by the hope of earning enough money to cure her. After finishing work at the company each day, Mikuni would stop by the hospital to check on her and talk with her. For a while, it seemed like life might finally settle into peace, and the sun might finally shine on the two of them. But soon, his father's company began to struggle and approached the brink of bankruptcy. One of the interconnected businesses in the network had problems, which triggered a chain reaction affecting the entire system. The Mikuni family's company, being central to this network, suffered the most. As if that weren't already devastating, Takako's condition also worsened around the same time. Every hospital in Japan had given up on her case, leaving only one option: send her to the United States for treatment, where there might be a chance to extend her life. When the doctor delivered this news, it hit Mikuni like a bolt of lightning. But he made up his mind he would save his sister no matter what. That very evening, he returned home and pleaded with his father to send Takako to America for treatment. But instead of agreeing, his father outright refused. He insisted that all of the family's remaining assets had to go toward saving the company. Even if Takako died, the company had to be preserved and developed. He went as far as to say that while he was indeed a father, business came first, and there were more important things to protect than his own children. Those cruel words shattered any remaining affection Mikuni had for his father. At that moment, he no longer considered him his father. Mikuni resolved to earn the money himself to continue Takako's treatment. But right after that, Mikuni was locked in his room. Days and nights passed in hopelessness, and by the time he was finally allowed to leave, his sister's condition had already deteriorated to a critical point. When Mikuni rushed to the hospital, Takako was already on a ventilator, her breathing weaker than ever. It turned out that Takako herself had refused to go to the US for treatment because she didn't want to leave Japan or her brother behind. What she truly wanted was simply to spend more time talking with Mikuni. In the end, what was meant to happen inevitably did later that night. Takako fell into an eternal sleep, and that was the last time Mikuni ever spoke with his sister. Sometime later, the pink-haired clown Masakaki appeared and offered Mikuni a place in the financial district. Having lost his sister and no longer wishing to remain in his cold-hearted father's home, Mikuni accepted without hesitation. After entering and learning more about the financial district, Mikuni realized he could use its system to protect people in the real world, people with fates like his and Takako's. From there, Mikuni founded the Guild Alliance. Returning to the present, after winning the deal against Sonoza, the relationship between Kimimaro and MSU became much closer. She now felt comfortable openly sharing her thoughts as an asset with her Entre, and Kimimaro also came to understand her more deeply. One day, while taking MSU out for her favorite ramen, Kimimaro unexpectedly ran into the chubby man who had been his opponent in his first deal after arriving in the financial district. The three of them sat down to enjoy their meal together and had a lively conversation. Kimimaro took this chance to ask him about the secret behind the connection between an Entre and their asset. However, the man admitted that he didn't know much about it either. At the next table, a businessman and his group were insulting and bullying a female asset. At first, Kimimaro didn't want to get involved with that kind of lowlife, so he and MCU left. But after walking a short distance, he suddenly turned back, returned to the ramen shop, and beat the crap out of the vile businessman. Our protagonist ended up getting punched in the face for playing the hero. But although MSU didn't quite understand the human world, seeing Kimimaro protect another asset moved her deeply. She completely fell for him. Later, when they returned home, the two of them watched a romantic movie together. When a kissing scene came on between the male and female lead, it made MSU genuinely curious. With his inexperience in romance, Kimimaro explained to her that kissing was a way for two people who truly love each other to express their feelings. Hearing that made MSU all the more curious, so she asked if they could try kissing. Our hero, being a pure virgin, had no clue how to kiss, so he quickly refused, saying you had to really love each other to kiss. From that moment, MCU realized that what she felt for Kimimaro was, in fact, love. That night, while riding the usual black taxi on his way to the financial district, Kimimaro suddenly sensed that something was very off. Something in the real world outside seemed to have subtly changed. The elderly driver brushed it off, saying he was just imagining things. But that feeling, Kimimaro's anxiety about the future of the world, was growing more and more likely to come true. Meanwhile, in the financial district, Mikuni's Guild Alliance and the other players there were in dire straits due to crashing interest rates and plummeting stock values across Southeast Asian countries. If this continued, nothing would be able to hold together for much longer. One guild member was reminded of a nation once called the Caribbean Republic. After the collapse of the North American financial districts, that country completely vanished from the world. If the same thing were to happen to the financial districts in Southeast Asia, then Japan too would not be able to escape the looming threat of annihilation. That was why Mikuni quickly launched a plan known as C. At that time, out in the real world, the streets had begun to empty due to the ongoing economic crisis. Sato went to meet with Takadazaki to make a deal regarding a secret chip she had previously asked him to retrieve. During this meeting, Takadazaki revealed a shocking piece of information. There was a traitor within Mikuni's guild alliance. He also added that he had encountered Kimamero's asset long ago, and even claimed that MCU was somehow connected to Kimamero's father, the one who had committed suicide because of money. Takadazaki tried to sell this juicy bit of information to Sato, but she showed no interest at all and simply turned her back and walked away. Kimamaro still attended school like usual, but today he noticed that something felt off. His classmates seemed different. Even Hanabi, his crush, was no longer cheerful and optimistic like before. This reminded him of what Sato had once investigated, that the future of humanity in this real world was becoming increasingly bleak. While walking lost in thought, Kimamaro unexpectedly encountered his teacher, Ibara, standing on the rooftop of a tall building. He rushed up to see what was happening and learned that recently, Ibara had tried every way possible to reclaim his 3 beloved children, and his wife even going so far as to destroy his own educational research projects out of desperation, but all efforts had failed. At last, Ibara had turned to one final method, using his own life to try and buy back his family. Upon hearing this, Kimamaro immediately stopped his teacher and promised he would find a way to restore Ibara's future. He then hurried to the financial district to confront Masakaki. Meeting the pink-haired clown, Kimamaro instantly demanded to reclaim the futures of Ibara's 3 children, whom Ibara had lost after a previous deal against Kimamaro. He offered to pay Masakaki double, 10 times, even 100 times more than what Ibara had originally staked, but Masakaki only shook his head. Futures, once gambled away, could never be reclaimed, no matter how much money was offered. With no choice left, Kimamaro dejectedly returned home. Meanwhile, at the guild's base, Mikuni was still busy working with the members of his alliance, frantically trying to contain the spiraling collapse of the Southeast Asian financial districts. After the failed negotiation with Masakaki, Kimamaro went to Ibara's house, only to find that he wasn't there. Realizing something was wrong, he rushed to school to ask the faculty about Ibara's whereabouts, only to be told that the teacher had died in a traffic accident struck by a drunk driver. Kimamaro was completely devastated by the news. He wandered alone to a park and sat there silently, more deeply aware than ever of how the world around him was crumbling apart. At that same time, back at her house, Hanabi looked utterly depressed, an expression totally opposite to her usual cheerful, optimistic self. She sat cutting up letters filled with heartfelt words from her students until she collapsed from exhaustion on the living room sofa. She looked like a lifeless doll, completely devoid of emotion. Back to Kimamaro, overwhelmed by the chaos around him. He withdrew all of the Midas money from his account and headed to the financial district. Sitting in that familiar, mysterious car, he eventually drifted off to sleep. In his dream, he saw a sweet, newborn baby girl being cradled lovingly in her mother's arms. His parents were giving her a name, and that name was all too familiar, Msio. Just as the dream reached its most important moment, Kimamaro woke up. A short while later, in the central plaza of the financial district, Kimamaro set fire to all of his Midas money, with MCU's full support marking a major turning point in his way of thinking. Sato told him that, above all else, what truly matters is trust and belief. Even so, no matter how much money Kimamaro burned, the bank could immediately print more at any time. It was truly the kind of money that never ran out, just like the rumors said. Sato also told him one more thing. The financial district was nearing its limit. It, too, would soon collapse. A while later, Kimamaro went to see Mikuni to confront him, but their conversation turned into a heated argument due to their opposing views. Kimamaro was beginning to feel that Mikuni's goal to sacrifice the future in order to save the present was absurd. But Mikuni countered that without the present, there would be no future. However, for Kimamaro, the present existed because of the future. Right at that moment, an unimaginable event occurred. The Southeast Asia branch of the financial district officially collapsed after interest rates and stock values there plummeted uncontrollably. This led to the complete disappearance of a country, Singapore. Its people, scenery, and infrastructure all disintegrated into ashes in an instant. At that time, over in the Guild Alliance's territory, Mikuni was urging all members to immediately implement Plan C before it was too late. Going back 3 hours earlier, at the FM Central Headquarters in Washington, D.C., a special closed-door G20 meeting was taking place. The topic was the rapid changes in the Southeast Asian market that were bound to trigger a major financial crisis, pushing humanity into a desperate search for funding. In addition, the collapse of a single financial district would cause a chain reaction that would affect other districts, a phenomenon commonly referred to as C. During the meeting itself, all IFM members received breaking news about what was happening in Singapore. To prevent Japan from being destroyed by the wave of C, Mikuni decided to use his special Darkness card to request Masakaki, the pink-haired clown, to activate the Midas Bank's money printer. Mikuni then exchanged 20 years of his own future for a massive amount of black money enough to support 80% of banks and major corporations. At the same time in the real world, things were in utter chaos. After the unexplained disappearance of an entire country, Singapore, the wave of C quickly spread to other financial districts in Southeast Asia, such as Hong Kong and Shanghai. It wouldn't be long before it hit Japan directly. Back in the financial district, Mikuni and the guild members worked urgently to implement measures to reduce the impact of C as much as possible. By now, the wave of C had already begun approaching Japan, immediately causing the Tokyo stock market to face a severe downturn. Despite implementing price adjustment easing measures, trading volume kept falling far beyond acceptable levels. At the most critical moment, Mikuni and the guild stepped in to bail them out. Financial experts quickly began purchasing Mida's black money, and soon after, the stock market started to recover. Thanks to this, Japan narrowly avoided being swallowed by the wave of C. However, that same afternoon, Masakaki demanded Mikuni pay up the compensation, the 20 years of future he had staked earlier. That night, while talking with Kimimaro, Sato commented that pouring such a massive amount of Mida's black money into the real world would cost Japan an entire decade of its future. During their conversation, Sato also revealed to Kimimaro that it seemed Takadazaki, the information broker, had uncovered something regarding assets and Kimimaro's father. The very next day, Kimimaro went straight to the financial district to find Takadazaki. The man asked Kimimaro whether he wanted to know who his father's asset was back then, but he'd have to pay a transaction fee for the information. With no other choice, Kimimaro reluctantly handed over the money. Takadazaki then showed him a very old black and white photograph. Just one glance at it left MSU completely stunned. It looked like she had been Kimimaro's father's asset in the past. But the truth, as it turns out, wasn't quite what she thought. Although their appearances were nearly identical, Kimimaro's father's asset had black hair and a different name, Miwa. Takadazaki also revealed that she was a particularly powerful asset. But Miwa had completely disappeared after Yoga Kimimaro's father went bankrupt and was expelled from the financial district. As an extra bonus, Takadazaki offered one more theory. The reason why the two assets looked alike might be because the futures of both father and son shared a certain similarity. However, Sato disagreed with that idea. To her, the uncanny resemblance between the two assets symbolized the relationship and connection between father and son. In simpler terms, both Kimimaro and his father had been pursuing the same thing. This also served as proof that, although Yoga was obsessed with money, he truly loved his son. The evidence? Even though Yoga went bankrupt in the financial district, Kimimaro wasn't erased from the real world. He was still here, healthy and alive. Afterward, Sato gave MSU a cup of instant noodles and told her to remember the scent of that boy, Kimimaro. In the following days, Kimimaro witnessed more and more of the devastating consequences caused by Mikuni's decision to rescue Japan's economy from the wave of C. The first to be affected was Kimimaro's crush, Hanabi. Once a girl who took school seriously, she now kept skipping classes and no longer showed up. Kimimaro tried calling, but she wouldn't pick up. So he went to her house and was shocked to see how pale and lifeless she looked. Still, he felt relieved that she at least still existed. That afternoon, while taking out the trash at the convenience store where he worked, Kimimaro suddenly felt a chill, as if struck by a poisonous wind. Immediately afterward, the people and scenery around him completely changed. Bustling parks were now filled with starving homeless people. Classrooms that used to be packed now only had a single elderly teacher. Even the manager of the store where Kimimaro worked vanished right in front of his eyes. Terrified, Kimimaro rushed back to Hanabi's house, only to find her in an even worse state than earlier. She couldn't even remember her own name. The entire city was now shrouded in a terrifying red hue. Even Mikuni was stunned by the scale of destruction caused by his own choices. Back with Kimimaro after witnessing such horrifying scenes, he resolved to team up with the spy Sato to reclaim Japan's future. He shared the plan with MCU and declared to her that he would help her obtain a happy future like any normal girl. However, MCU didn't like that idea at all. If she stopped being an asset, she would no longer be able to fight by Kimimaro's side. She had truly fallen for our protagonist. Realizing her feelings, Kimimaro kissed her on the forehead, a kiss for the most important person to him. By this point, Japan's situation had grown even more dire. Only 3 children had been born in the past week, a deeply alarming number. At the same time, the population was aging at a frightening rate. A few days later, the financial markets in the United States also began to tremble. Currencies around the world began to lose value under pressure from the US dollar. The United States was attempting to intervene in every global currency to halt the chain reaction collapse caused by the wave of C. In other words, the US had successfully deflected the wave of C, and now it was about to return to Japan. Faced with this situation, Mikuni quickly met with Masakaki again to use the powerful Darkness card once more. He was prepared to sacrifice another 20 years of the future to print more Midas black money, even after having seen the terrifying consequences of doing so. Upon learning this, Kimimaro, Sato, and Takadazaki immediately devised a detailed plan to stop Mikuni's reckless actions. The core issue here is that only the person who possesses the Darkness card has the authority to activate the Midas money printing machine, and in the financial district, the only one who holds that card is Mikuni. According to Sato, there's only one possible way to stop him. After Mikuni activates the machine, the printing process and the sacrifice of future value take at least several hours to complete. During that short window, Kimimaro must initiate a deal with him and make Mikuni lose, forcing him into bankruptcy. Once Mikuni falls, Kimimaro must seize the Darkness card, shut down the printing machine, and return all the Midas money that had been created back into it. Following the plan, Takadazaki would take advantage of a traitor within Mikuni's guild alliance to steal a massive amount of black money from the guild, then distribute it among the public. This would rapidly devalue the Japanese yen into worthless paper, making all the assets Mikuni possessed practically valueless. That would open the opportunity for either Kimimaro or Sato to defeat him in a final deal and claim the Darkness card to reverse the money printing process and reclaim the future that had been mortgaged. Upon receiving word of this scheme, Mikuni immediately refused to deal with Kimimaro or Sato. However, Masakaki warned him that if he avoided the match, he would lose half of his total assets and wouldn't have enough money left to suppress the sea phenomenon. Left with no choice, Mikuni was forced to face Sato in a deal. Meanwhile, as Kimimaro entered the financial district, he was suddenly challenged by a guild member named Horiai. Kimimaro noticed something was off with MCU. She seemed different. After questioning Masakaki, he learned that whenever the Midas machine is active, assets suffer intense pain because they represent the future. Wanting to spare her, Kimimaro let MCU rest and went into battle alone. Without MCU's support, Kimimaro was quickly overwhelmed. However, since Horiai's asset was also being affected, Kimimaro managed to find an opening and wounded his opponent severely. Once both assets recovered, Kimimaro summoned MCU again. She unleashed her ultimate move, a massive firestorm that completely destroyed Horiai. Kimimaro had secured victory on his end. Back at the deal between Mikuni and Sato, our beautiful spy had gained control of Mikuni's asset, Kazu, by using the special ability of her own asset. But then, Q suddenly appeared. In an instant, Kazu was torn apart, and Sato was swiftly defeated by Mikuni's final move. Before being expelled from the financial district, Sato managed to transfer her asset to Kimimaro, hoping it would help him carry out the rest of their plan. At the same time, in the real world, Takadazaki was doing everything he could to spread the news of an imminent hyperinflation crisis throughout Japan via the media, hoping to further devalue the yen. As Kimimaro tried desperately to convince Mikuni that sacrificing the future to protect the present was a massive mistake, one of Mikuni's subordinates rushed in with urgent news about what Takadazaki was doing outside. Without hesitation, Mikuni ordered Masakaki to use the Darkness card again to print even more Midas money, this time willing to sacrifice his entire future. Kimimaro charged in to stop him, but was brutally knocked down by Mikuni. Just as he was at a complete loss, Masakaki suddenly reminded him that his own card had also turned black, upgraded to a Darkness card by order of the higher-ups. Without a moment of hesitation, Kimimaro ordered the pink-haired jester to shut down the Midas money printing machine. This action immediately triggered a one-on-one deal between Kimimaro and Mikuni. Meanwhile, back in the real world, things were spinning further into chaos. The people of Japan began to panic as hyperinflation erupted across the country. In the financial district, Kimimaro officially engaged in a final combat against Uncle Mikuni. As the battle began, Kimimaro used a mid-tier skill from the asset he had inherited from Sato, creating a clone of himself and launching a joint assault to deliver a loving strike to Mikuni. However, the shadow clone technique proved useless. Both of them were swiftly struck down, and the White Wolf asset even had part of its body bitten off by Q. Realizing he had no choice, Kimimaro summoned MCU for backup. Hoping to end the fight quickly, Mikuni decided to unleash Q's ultimate move, allowing her to take full control of MCU. But just before MCU's Firestorm attack could be released, both she and Kimimaro were completely frozen by Q's counter. Surprisingly, just as Mikuni launched the finishing blow, the weapon in his hand suddenly dissolved, sparing Kimimaro from defeat. The reason? In the real world, Japan's Ministry of Finance had announced a temporary suspension of the yen, causing the Black Meta's money to be exposed for what it truly was and rendering it worthless in circulation. As a result, Mikuni's power anchored to Meta's money dropped drastically. Seizing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Kimimaro ordered MCU to hold off Q, while he grabbed the direct sword and rushed to duel Mikuni head-on. In the end, he managed to land a devastating punch on his opponent. At that moment, memories of his sister Takako resurfaced in Mikuni's mind. He suddenly realized how much he resembled his own accursed father, and that ever since Takako passed away, he hadn't even known what he was fighting for. Then, Masakaki appeared to announce that since both the yen and Mita's money had lost all value at the same time, Japan had successfully escaped the chain effect of the sea phenomenon. Recognizing that Kimimaro had been right all along, Mikuni admitted defeat and handed over all authority to him. Kimimaro immediately used the Darkness card to shut down the Midas printing machine, reclaiming the entire mortgaged future. With that, the empire built on money and power, the financial district crumbled completely, turning into ashes buried in the past. At that moment, MCU bid farewell to Kimimaro with a passionate kiss on the lips, something she'd always wanted to try. Mikuni apologized to Q and chose to vanish along with the collapsing district. Outside, Sato was overjoyed that their mission to reclaim a brighter future had succeeded. Takadazaki and the mysterious old driver set out to travel the world. Meanwhile, the pink-haired jester Masakaki found happiness in finally being freed from the endless cycle of meaningless deals. Back in reality, Kimimaro saw that the world had changed maybe a lot, but what mattered most was that people were still alive and present. A bright future still awaited him. And with that, the story truly ends. There won't be a season 2, folks. See you all again in the next anime.